Well, hi everyone, Erin from the Impatient Gardener, getting very excited about a new year of gardening. But for me at least, an important thing to do when I start thinking about next year's garden is to reflect a little bit on last year's garden, which brings me to my personal 2022 award-winning plants. To be clear, there is no criteria for these awards. This is just a gut feeling. There's no one else who weighs in on these. It's mostly just created by me by sort of reflecting a little bit and looking back at photos and videos and realizing the things that really impressed me throughout the year. And the best thing about this award show is there's no big opening number. We're going to get right into it. So without further ado, the first award is for the best vegetable I grew this year. Now listen, I am a tomato gardener. I'm more of a tomato gardener than I am a vegetable gardener because at the end of the day, if there is one crop that I want to do really, really well, it's my tomatoes. I grow in a never-ending quest to find the perfect tomato. I'm sure it will never happen. I will always be looking for the next best tomato. And it was a pretty good tomato year, but that is not winning the award. The award this year is going to Asian Delite eggplant, which is quite an interesting pick for a person who doesn't actually care that much for eggplant. I don't have a lot of things I like to eat with eggplant other than baba ganoush and eggplant parmesan, which is really kind of a pain in the butt to make. But I got this Asian Delite eggplant. It is a new variety. I believe it was new. I think you can definitely buy seeds for it this coming year or now. I think it was new last year. And so I was sent a sample plant to grow. And this thing blew me away. So first of all, this is sort of a Japanese style eggplant in that they're very long and skinny fruit, which I greatly prefer because the worst part of an eggplant is that gooky middle. But what amazed me is that this thing just produced and produced and produced. Now, I lost track of how many eggplant this thing actually made, but it's definitely over 30. I gave so much eggplants away to friends and family because it was way more than I could use, and that was off of one single plant. The plant itself only probably got 30 inches tall. I had sort of a small, very small cage on it just to hold it upright, which was worked perfectly. And interestingly enough, it had very little flea beetle damage. Now that's probably has nothing to do with the variety. It probably has something to do more with other cultural things that were going on in my garden. But I thought it was worth noting because if you grow eggplant, you know that flea beetles kind of come with the territory. Next up, best annual grown from seed. There is a clear winner in this category. It is Snapdragon Madame Butterfly. Now this is a series. I grew the one called Bronze with White, which I think refers more to them mixing the bronze color with the white color to get this. It isn't really a bronze with white coloring. It's mostly a sort of muted peach, little bit of yellow and amber colors is what comes of it. It doesn't matter, it's the Madame Butterfly series that is what's great here. So let me tell you why this plant stood out above the rest. It produced flowers for me from the same plants from June through past a frost, because of course it loves cold weather. Now, granted, we're a little cooler here in summers. We don't really get a lot of 100-degree temperatures here, which is why it probably produced for me all summer. And if you're in a significantly warmer area, it might have a little bit of a lull in summer. But here it went all year. I grew this as a cut and come again flower, and honestly there aren't a lot of those out there. Now this gets really long stems. I don't think it would really do well in a garden use, but for a cut flower use it was perfect. It has different kinds of flowers. I think some people call them azalea types. They're sort of double open flowers versus the typical snapdragon with the little mouth. So some people don't even realize they're snapdragons because they look a little bit different than the snapdragon they're used to. I like to grow these on the edges of my raised beds because then they sort of flop a little and the stems get really cool little curves to them, which I think is really interesting in bouquets. Probably if you were a proper flower grower, you would want straight stems and you'd want to net those to keep them going straight. I don't need that. The other thing that a proper flower grower does is succession sow, and I am terrible about succession sowing, particularly when it comes to flowers. So this is the perfect flower for me because I just kept cutting from these and more flowers just grew, and it was fabulous. Since we're talking about annuals, let's talk about the best potted annual. And that is a clunky way to say that this was a plant that I didn't grow from seed, that I grew from a plant. And these often are grown from tissue culture. So a lot of times you can't buy seeds for these plants because the seeds are mostly sterile, and that's part of the breeding for them. Pretty clear winner in this category for me. It is Unplugged So Blue Mealy Cup Salvia. Now, salvias are having a bit of a moment, both perennial and annual. This one was really good. Now, I've grown that Rockin' Fuchsia and the Rockin' Blue Suede Shoes varieties. I find those to be, they're beautiful, really big and rangy. And so for me, that wasn't perfect for areas where I had a little bit of a tighter area, which is where this Unplugged So Blue Salvia came in. It is a really nice size. It has a bit of a shiny leaf on it. And of course, I love a blue flower, and this is a true blue. And so I love that mixed with a chartreuse. I love my chartreuse, and there is no better color to go with chartreuse than blue in my mind. There is a runner-up in this category, and this is not a new plant either. This is Lobularia Blushing Princess. Also, Dark Night. Also a great one. I grew those two together at the back end of the vegetable garden underneath the Belgian fence. And what's great about those is that they bloomed and bloomed and bloomed, and it's a little bit shady on the ground there. The raised bed in front of it kind of shades that area, and they have no problem with that whatsoever. On top of that, I didn't fertilize them at all. I did mix in organic fertilizer before I planted them, and that's it. I never went back and gave them any fertilizer at all. I just kept them well watered, and they produced all year. So a bit of a runner-up in that category. Best perennial of the year for me was very difficult for me to sort of pick because I added a lot of new perennials to my garden this year. But one that I've actually grown before and one that I added a lot of in the garden that Roy Diblick and I worked on together was Crystal Blue Salvia. So here we are back at salvias, but these perennial salvias, don't sleep on these. They are such good plants. The reason that Crystal Blue sort of tops the other ones that I grew this year, which are Blue Hill and Snow White and Weesawi, is because it rebloomed better than any perennial salvia I have grown. When the first flush was over, I cut it back to, 4 inches, something like that. Got a really full rebloom. Usually when you cut salvias back, you will get a little bit of a rebloom. This was full, new, beautiful flowers. So in terms of rebloom, it just did the best out of all of them. And I love those salvias because they are such hard plants and totally and fully deer resistant. Okay, in the perennial category, the best newcomer this year that I added to my garden was Persicaria Orange Field. Now, you guys have probably heard me talk about Persicaria before. I'm having a bit of a love affair with that plant. I only discovered it a few years ago, and I'm just kind of learning about all the different varieties out there. And it's a totally overlooked plant. And unfortunately, you won't find a lot of it in garden centers because of that. But I found a few that I added. And the two new ones that I added this year that were really interesting, I ordered both of those from Digging Dog Nursery because it was the only place I could find them. One is Orange Fields and one is Fats Domino. But Orange Fields had these long, skinny blooms. I think you can see that I just touch them all the time. And they're sort of orangish corally when they first emerged, and then they became sort of a hot pink almost. Really wide range of growth on these in terms of sun exposure. So you can do sun down to certainly part shade. They just are great, tough plants. And they bulk up a little bit. And in some of these areas, I wanted something to bulk up a little bit. Totally deer resistant on these. The only thing I would say is not Japanese beetle resistant. The Japanese beetles did go after the leaves, which I wasn't expecting. So that is sort of my, the newest addition to my garden that I was most excited about this year and really wowed me this year. Best shrub of the year is a really tough category for me because there wasn't one that really blew me away this year. There was no outstanding one for me. If I had to pick a winner in this category of just fine performers, I'd probably say it was Tiny Tough Stuff Hydrangea. Nothing new. I've grown this plant for several years. It just bloomed really well and looked really nice in the garden this year. And that one, I do amend the soil a little bit in that area and throw a little bit of soil acidifier in there. So what I tend to get is kind of a range of pinks and purples that kind of mix together. And it's kind of a nice effect. But I would say I've seen this similar performance out of this plant before, and it's what I expect out of it. there were no shrubs that stood out to me as really, really blowing me away this year. Dahlia of the year is always a hard pick for me. I love my dahlias. I love them all. There were two new ones that I grew this year that wowed me. And so we have a very close one here. The winner is Milena Fleur. New one for me. Both of these are sort of very similarly colored. They're sort of a pink with kind of a yellow center, and that kind of fades in and out as they age. Milena Fleur though wowed me because I love a dahlia that I don't have to stake. And Milena Fleur grew, I mean, I'm going to say 40 inches tall, certainly 36 inches tall. I had it right at the front of the border, got a little taller than I expected. Those stems were so fat and so stiff. You could bring a hurricane through there and I don't think they would have fallen over with zero staking. So any dahlia that will give me that kind of performance without staking, I'm a fan of. The next one is another non-staker, but this one you don't stake because it's short. It's only about 20 inches tall. This is Melody Pink Allegro. Has a very similar coloration to that, but more of like a water lily type shape to the flower. Almost looks like a water lily actually when you look at just the flower part of it. I grew this both in the ground and in the big container by the front door. It performed equally well in both places. A really good one for containers and certainly like right at the front of the border. By the way, great vase life on both of these. Sometimes that's not always the case with dahlias. These both did great in vases. All right, now we move on to perhaps a controversial one, grass of the year. Some people are not into ornamental grasses. I am and have added oodles of them. And there are some stalwarts in my garden. You guys know that I have a lot of Hacklenacloa and it performs extraordinarily well for me. But I wanted to look a little further afield for this award. And there's a runner-up here, which is Dischampia Goldtau, which created, when it started blooming, almost a halo effect when it was backlit by the sun. What a gorgeous performer. But the winner in the grass category is one, unfortunately, I don't have a great photo of. Somewhere I included it in a video and I can't find that because I talked about it a little bit in a video. But it was gorgeous. And that is Purple Lovegrass, Eragrostis pectiniacea. Again, this is another very ethereal one. I do love these sort of ethereal plants with this very fine texture, but it does get these little purple flowers on it. It flopped a little bit. I have no problem with that. It is just the most, I mean, you see this grass, unlike some grasses that are bold and really draw your attention to them, this one kind of creeps up on you and you see it over there and you instantly fall in love. Maybe that's why it's called that, because it just draws you in. I think you guys know that I get really jazzed up about container plantings, and I do a lot of them. But this year for me, my winner for my personal best container planting was the big urn in the middle of the garden. I went really simple with that planting this year. We had a bird of paradise as sort of a centerpiece in it. I had Ascot Blue Rainbow Euphorbia, several of those, some Purple Heart, a sun patience in there that was, I think, bright pink, and that was it. So, little lesson for myself, fewer plants is better, a simpler design works better in that location, but it all came together really well. I think the star of that show was that Ascot Rainbow Euphorbia did really well. It is borderline hardy for me here, so I did dig it out of that container, plant it in the ground, and maybe it'll come back this year and I will use it again in another container. Best garden visitor. Of course, I love to see the wildlife in my garden, but listen, there is no second in this category because we had a family of foxes hanging out here this year. Now, not only do I love seeing those foxes because it keeps the rabbit population way in check, which is amazing, but that family of foxes, we saw the mom all spring, and then she started moving her kits around, and they spent a day hanging out right next to our driveway by our neighbor's shed playing, and it's by far the cutest thing I've ever seen in my life. They were adorable. I could have watched them all day long. We never saw them again after that. I see their footprints. I know they're around, but that was a special day, and I was so happy to see those guys around here. And finally, the last, I guess this is the big award, best plant of the year, the plant that blew me away, could there be any doubt that it would be the red Abyssinian banana that I grew in the big pot? I've never had so much fun growing a plant in my life because I had no idea that this plant would go from being about 30 inches tall to, I think we measured it at 11 feet tall by the end of the season. Unbelievable. Of course, I had a great time trying to get that out of the pot at the end of the season. We'll see if it overwintered. That'll always be a great trip come spring when we pull it out to see how it actually did. But in terms of a plant that performed well, surprised the heck out of me, was just fun to grow, and certainly caught everyone's eye. I mean, it was made for that. This award was made for that banana. So congratulations, banana. May you winter in happiness in my basement. I think it's safe to say that you will see all of these plants in some form in my garden again next year, because what's the point of winning an award if you don't make a repeat appearance? That's a wrap for 2022 here. Leave me a comment, let me know what your best performers were for the year, those plants that just blew your socks off, because we all need more plants to grow. Hey, thank you for being a part of my garden and my gardening life this year. I so enjoyed bringing you along for all the fun here, and I hope you had a great garden year, and I can't wait to move into the next one with you all. See you in the next video. Bye, everybody.